Microsoft has given up on trying to innovate. This is usually a terrible sign for companies. We've seen countless examples of juggernauts being toppled over due to a lack of innovation, from Nokia and Xerox to Blockbuster and Yahoo. But this doesn't seem to be hurting Microsoft. In fact, at this point, they haven't been innovating for quite some time. Microsoft is the only tech giant that hasn't created a revolutionary product within the past 10 to 20 years. Apple has the iPhone, Google has Chrome, Amazon has AWS, Tesla has electric self-driving cars, and even Meta is trying with the metaverse. But what about Microsoft? Microsoft is still really only known for two products, Windows and Microsoft Office. And it's been nearly 40 years since Windows was released and over 30 years since Office was released. For those of you commenting that they created ChatGPT, they didn't create that. They bought it, and this is really the secret behind their success over the past 15 years. They've been trying to buy themselves to the top. Historically speaking though, on innovative companies buying innovative companies doesn't usually work out. Likely the most notable example of this in recent history is GE. Back in the late 2000s, they did everything from jet engine manufacturing and financing to producing appliances and pumping gas. But eventually, this became way too much to handle, and GE would end up shrinking their investments from $781 billion to $164 billion. They've even spun off into 3 different companies to try to lower the burden. So, little to say, you can't just buy yourself to the top. But Microsoft seems to be the exception, as they've been doing better than ever. In the past 5 years alone, their revenue has doubled, their net income has tripled, and their stock? Well, their stock has grown 10x within the past 10 years. For perspective, that's the same amount that Apple has grown, and they've had the mobile revolution on their side. So, has Microsoft cracked the code to eternal life, or are they going to end up like GE? Taking a look back, the reality is that Microsoft has never been innovative with their products. The key to their success has always been brilliant business strategies and marketing, as opposed to actually creating the next big thing. This is true for even Windows and Office. Windows was ripped off from the Mac, which was ripped off from Xerox. So the product itself wasn't all that innovative, but what was innovative was Microsoft's go-to-market strategy. Instead of limiting their software to a specific piece of hardware, they made it compatible with basically everything. Not only did they make Windows compatible with everything, they also made Windows accessible to everyone by actively encouraging piracy. And if you don't believe me, here's Bill Gates on the topic.
Sort of as long as they're going to steal it, we want them to steal ours. They sort of get addicted, and then we somehow figure out how to collect sometime in the next decade. So it's a great place to be involved in, and it was a lot of fun, which was, I guess, the key.
As you can see, the key to Microsoft's early success was simply extraordinary market penetration. While not everyone was paying off the bat, this strategy gave Microsoft unbelievable market control, which they were eventually able to monetize by licensing to PC makers, corporations, universities, and governments. This was really phase 1 of Microsoft's rise. They were able to successfully substitute market penetration for innovation. Moving on to phase 2, we would see Microsoft substitute market domination for innovation. The first notable example of this was Internet Explorer. Microsoft saw the explosive success of the internet back in the early 90s with AOL and Netscape, and they decided they wanted a piece of the pie. So in 1995, Microsoft would go ahead and launch IE, but again, there was nothing particularly special about IE. It was just a run-of-the-mill browser with an even less inspiring name. I mean, it was literally named Internet Explorer. At least there's no confusion about what it does, I guess. But none of this mattered, because Microsoft once again had an effective strategy to get the product to people. The strategy was to simply bundle in IE with Windows. Sure, people could go out and download whatever browser they wanted after they buy the computer. But back in the late 1990s, people were just then getting their first computers, so most people had no baseline or prior expectations. Everything was new to them, so they might as well stick with the browser that's already there. This would lead to IE's market share rising to 95% by 2003 and a slew of antitrust lawsuits, but that's a whole other story. The takeaway here is that IE wasn't successful because it was innovative. IE was successful because Microsoft was able to leverage their domination with Windows. Microsoft would use this same strategy on a few more products throughout the late 90s and early 2000s. MSN Search, for example, was decently popular because it was pushed by IE, which was pushed by Windows. The same thing could be said about Hotmail and MSN Messenger and basically all of Microsoft's other products during this time period. But if you read the news at the time, you would see headlines that, yes, Microsoft was a monopoly, but also that they were the most innovative tech company in the world. And let's just say, Microsoft would let this go to their head. By the end of the 1990s, Microsoft had become the world's largest company, and they were synonymous with tech. Fun fact, Microsoft is the only top 10 company from the year 2000 that's still a top 10 company today. But maintaining this level of success was by no means an easy feat. In fact, the next 10 years would be the decade of failure for Microsoft as they would try to innovate, and their inability to innovate would really shine through. The first notable example of this came in 2006 with the Microsoft Zune. Most of you have probably never even heard about the Zune, and the main reason for this was that it was such a massive flop. The Zune was essentially Microsoft's answer to the iPod, but there were a lot of fundamental issues with the Zune, starting with timing. For starters, the Zune came out 5 years after the original iPod, meaning that the iPod was already the go-to product for most people. So Microsoft was fighting an uphill battle from day one, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Plenty of successful products came out super late like Chrome, Gmail, and Zoom. But the reason that these products were able to take over was because they were categorically better than the competition. The same could not be said about the Zune. The Zune was by no means a bad product. In fact, users liked it just as much as the iPod, and it costed the same as the iPod. But this was also the biggest problem. If it's identical to the iPod, who would buy it over the iPod, which was already the popular thing? Well, the answer is no one, and Microsoft would cancel the Zune just a few years later. Microsoft should have learned from this and approached smartphones from a different strategy, but Microsoft would go ahead and make a fool of themselves not much later. I mean, just listen to former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer's reaction to the iPhone.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
Now, to his credit, he did clarify that it might sell really well, but if that's the case, you probably shouldn't be laughing at it.
Now, it may sell very well or not. We have our strategy. We've got great Windows mobile devices in the market today. You can get a Motorola Q phone now for $99. It's a very capable machine.
Instead, you should be looking at why it might sell well, who will be buying the product, and how you can get a piece of the pie. Microsoft was in the perfect position to become the Windows of the smartphone world, but instead they would let Google take this spot. In the meantime, Microsoft would sit around for 3 years and come out with the Windows Phone in 2010. The worst part, though, was the OS. The reason the iPhone was so successful was not because it was a small computer, but because it was a reimagined small computer. Every single application, interaction, and gesture were reimagined to work on a smaller screen with fingers instead of a mouse. You could say that Apple was indeed innovating. With the Windows Phone, on the other hand, we basically got a beta version of Windows 8 on a smaller screen. Unsurprisingly, the Windows Phone would not only be a humiliating failure, but also an expensive one. But unlike with the Zune, Microsoft would actually learn from the Windows Phone, and let's just say, they've turned things around big time. Usually, companies have quite an ego when it comes to acknowledging or acquiring a competitor. They usually want to do everything themselves. This was very much the case with Microsoft as well. Instead of working with AOL and Netscape, Microsoft decided to compete against them. Instead of working with the iPod and iPhone, Microsoft decided to compete against Apple. But all of this would change in early 2014 when Satya Nadella took over the company. Satya was very different from his peer CEOs. Most tech CEOs are world-class in specific fields. Tim Cook, for example, is world-class at supply chain and operations. Similarly, Sundar Pichai is the technical genius behind Chrome. Satya, on the other hand, wasn't an expert in any one field, nor did he go to IIT in India or Stanford and Harvard. This is by no means to say that Satya was incompetent, but the biggest characteristic he brought to the table was not a technical skill. Rather, it was humility. He had the humility to accept that younger, newer companies were simply doing things better. And instead of trying to resist like his predecessors, he was going to embrace, leading to Microsoft's era of acquisitions. He started off relatively small with Mojang in 2014 for $2.5 billion. These are the guys behind Microsoft, but it didn't take him long to scale up. In 2016, Microsoft would go ahead and buy LinkedIn for $26.2 billion. He followed this up with GitHub for $7.5 billion. ZeniMax Media also for $7.5 billion. Nuance Communications for $19.7 billion, Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion, and of course, $10 billion into ChatGPT. Those are just a few of Microsoft's most notable investments and acquisitions. Here's a full list of all of Microsoft's known purchases. This is in stark contrast to every other tech giant. Apple, for example, just avoids high-profile acquisitions altogether. Their last big purchase was Beats, and that was almost 10 years ago. Google, on the other hand, does do a crap ton of acquisitions, but almost all of them are in the tens of millions or hundreds of millions. They're not in the billions or tens of billions. They clearly prefer to play an active role in building up brands as opposed to buying out established businesses. The only other tech company that has engaged in such massive deals is Facebook, but there's a key difference between Facebook's purchases and Microsoft's purchases. Facebook buys products to integrate into their own ecosystem. Microsoft buys companies as passive investments and keeps them as separate from their original business as possible. And if you don't believe me, check this out. It's been 7 years since Microsoft acquired LinkedIn, but to this day, there is no sign-in with Microsoft or Outlook option, though there is a sign-in with Google or Apple option. The same thing can be said about GitHub. To create a GitHub account, you have to do it the old-fashioned way by entering an email address. You can't just log in with Microsoft. And it's not just signing in either. Users of these services wouldn't even know that these companies are owned by Microsoft unless they were explicitly told. This goes much deeper than just superficial things as well. If you ask the CEOs of these acquired companies, they have nothing but good things to say about Microsoft. Microsoft has not forgotten why we did the deal in the first place and what the important pillars of the deal are. The first and foremost principle is to put developers first, and that is what we do every day. In stark contrast, all of WhatsApp's and Instagram's founders have left Facebook on negative terms. Clearly, Microsoft is not just acquiring a bunch of companies for a bunch of money. They're also maintaining them in the right way. In the beginning of this video, we talked about how Microsoft is the only tech giant that hasn't created a revolutionary product in the past 10 to 20 years. But they're also the only tech giant that isn't dependent on one revolutionary product. To this day, over 50% of all of Google's revenue comes from Google Search. Over 50% of Apple's revenue comes from the iPhone. The only reason Amazon is even profitable is because of AWS. And the entire business of Meta can be summed up by Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. Microsoft, on the other hand, isn't tied down by one or even a handful of products. They are truly a diversified business with hundreds and hundreds of products, each operating on independent terms. Before, the sentiment around Microsoft was that they were able to transition from being a consumer business to being an enterprise business. But this doesn't tell the full story, as they have since transitioned from being an enterprise business to being a full-on holding company. And that is the state of Microsoft today, and why they're able to get away without innovating themselves. Are you a fan of the new Microsoft? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you would like to see more videos about the evolution of various tech companies. And of course, consider checking out our Discord community to suggest future video ideas and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.